Rose McGowan and the 24-year-old model who recorded Weinstein in action should be applauded for their bravery. The latter had no idea there were other women who had reported Weinstein until the police dropped a hint. She didn't then go out and try to make contact with the other women to ensure her story matched theirs. She did the exact opposite. She put her life on the line to catch him in the act in order to protect other women that she hadn't even met. Obviously, this is not the approach that Manson's accusers have taken. You can argue that they put their reputations on the line, which inarguably has led to a public witch hunt to discredit them. That is not my purpose here, and I'm going to quote, or paraphrase if you prefer, Southern law to make this point. Both parties must be judged by the evidence. Neither should be put on a pedestal to be out of reach or knocked off one simply to see them fall. They all deserve a fair shake. Now, I know I've said many times the mere existence of this book and its relationship to the Me Too movement leaves a sour taste in my mouth, and that's the very reason I've been following this case. But it's not evidence of truthfulness or falsity. It's quite simply a note of interest. Nothing more, nothing less. On that note, we're going to tune into Southern Law's last video because it makes some very valid points on both sides of the equation.
I'm going to come off the fence, this straddling fence that process guys like me often like to sit on, and go undercover and do a little reconnaissance on the far sides of this case. People who will tell you that absolutely Manson did not abuse these women, particularly Wood. He's incapable of it. He's a sweet guy, gives to charity. No way. This is bad motives, all lies. And then change outfits, cycle around to the other side. Manson's obviously an abuser. These women are not lying. You need to believe these women. They're telling the truth. Absolutely certain that they were abused by Manson.
That is a very good summary of what is bound to happen because of Amber Heard's stupidity.
So let's look at the basis for some of those arguments and maybe encourage people that are that far stratified in these camps to look at their own arguments and be prepared to analyze the case maybe a little more holistically than they have so far.
Awesome. Let's do it.
So if you're telling me that absolutely Manson did not do this, he didn't abuse anybody, you're absolutely sure that this is a lie, and part of your basis for that is he's not the kind of person who would do it. He's being maligned for how he appears, judged for his art, then you're going to have to reconcile with the fact, and we'll get into this, that you're calling him a liar in ways that are material to this case. Likewise, if you're telling me that Wood has told the truth, she stood up, she was brave to do it, she finally gave a voice to the women who had been abused by this guy, and there is no way that there's anything other than that's exactly what happened. You're going to have to contend with the fact that you are calling her flat out a liar in ways that are material to this case.
I get where he's coming from, but can we have somewhere in the middle, maybe?
You got the luxury to do that if you're on social media. You don't have the luxury to do that if you're the lawyers for these people or anybody advising them, because you must be able to look at the other side's case, and you also have to be able to look at the weaknesses of your case. And one of the things you don't want to do is put a proposition on the table that is so ridiculous that the other side can attack it and undermine everything else you say, because this all comes back to credibility. Who's going to have it? And in a civil case, like what these guys are going through, the jury's tasked with looking at the greater weight of the evidence. Whose story is more likely than not true? This isn't beyond a reasonable doubt kind of situation here. These are two civil litigants going after each other. So you want to tilt that table just slightly one way or the other. So you look for the other side's weaknesses, okay? You look for your own strengths. You look at your own weaknesses and how to counter those, how to get those out there and explain them. You can't ignore them. So we'll look at Manson first, and then we'll look at Wood and see the people who are just certain that he's correct, what might they be ignoring? I've looked at a lot of the things that the anti-Manson people have sent me or that I found on my own. I've looked at a lot of the things that pro-Manson people have sent me or that I found on my own. And I will definitely agree with this proposition. Manson should not be judged based on how he looks or based on the music that he makes, or based on a character that he may sometimes play. Abusers are not captured within one type of look or behavior pattern. Somebody who's the holiest person in the church could secretly be an abuser. A trusted family member could be an abuser. An abuser could be somebody who just exactly looks like an abuser, standing in a trench coat on the side of the road next to a van that says free candy on it. Okay? So they can come in any shape, size, stripe, or whatever. On the other hand, the fact that Manson has these attributes of misogyny associated with his character, that's not a free pass to think that it's impossible for him to be an abuser, or to take everything that he's ever done that could be considered a trait of an abuser and shove it into this, well, that's just art category. It could be, okay, but not automatically. That's just an excuse to forgive all the lies that he may tell. They have to be looked at and see whether this is a character trait that tends toward abuse or whether it is art. If you're assessing the notion that he is not capable of doing that, okay? I'm not saying it's evidence all that should be presented in court to show he's an abuser. No, not just general everything that he's ever done. I'm talking about the people who say there's no way that he possibly abused anybody because he's sweet, he gives to charity and things like that. If you're going to talk about general character stuff, then you need to look at the whole character of the person.
Ah, but what is his whole character? None of us know. We don't know if the character he puts across in interviews is really him, or if we're just seeing glimpses of him during those interviews. We have no way of knowing.
So when somebody says, well, Manson's sweet, what are you supposed to make out of that? He's sweet to everybody all the time? How in the world would you know that? That doesn't make any sense to suggest that he couldn't be abusive. That's essentially irrelevant. Even if he were going around being mean all the time, it doesn't mean that he's abusive behind closed doors to some criminal level. So to me, that's essentially a frivolous kind of argument. Ted Bundy wasn't rude to everybody that he met. However, when he was mean, he was extremely mean. So I'm throwing that out. He gave to charity, okay? That's nice if he did it. That's great. It doesn't have anything to do with whether he's ever abused anybody or not. So take a look at Manson and see maybe why his situation is going to line up a little differently than Depp's, say. Manson created his whole persona based on an original concept of beat up your mom music, he called it. And in his book, he has this tale where he assaults his mother physically pretty drastically. And throughout the decades that he's performed, he's talked about locking girls up in closets. He's talked about wishing he could kill them. He's talked about being turned on, that they're terrified. He's made so many misogynistic comments, it's impossible to catalog them all. Now, I have no doubt and completely agree that many of these were made in a flippant manner and that he was joking. I get that. Not sure exactly the audience that you pull in, although I guess there is one, by making jokes about beating up your mother or wanting to kill women or rape is funny, that sort of thing. I guess there's an audience for that. I know that's not the totality of all of his music, and thank God for that. I can't have any defenders if that's all he talked about. But it is some of what he talked about. Now, of course, they're going to throw down and say, well, that's just his art, bro. That's just his art. You can't use any of that against him. And that could be true. That could be true. Again, maybe he's building up to this audience that needs to hear more about, accommodating rape and beating women and things. That's artistic in a sense.
I would argue that this is more about challenging society's ideas. He's always had an issue with society's obsession with celebrity versus violence, like movies, for example.
But an artist's art is not inherently necessarily separate from the personality. And I did find one witness who could comment directly, maybe more than any of us, on whether Manson sees his own personal self is completely distinct from his art. Let's see what this witness says.
How natural does it feel the way you are perceived, and is it sort of a mask that you actually remove at certain times, or is it always there for you?
I don't ever remove my personality. I don't wake up and go to bed, dressed as I do when I'm in public. Neither does anyone else. But I don't consider myself to be playing a role or to be wearing a costume or a mask or anything like that. I just enjoy expressing myself through the way I look, and my personality is always the same.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, and then there's not one easy level to my personality. Most people would probably think that I'm schizophrenic because I behave quite differently in each situation.
Well, whoever that guy is, he seems to have his finger on this notion of whether Marilyn Manson is separate completely as a person versus the character that he plays, and not really, not so much, huh?
I'm not sure I agree that that's what Manson was saying there, but we'll continue.
That makes sense to me. I get that. And I think you'll see when you see Manson interviewed and things, especially when he's sober, he's a pretty quick-witted person. I can see why people are attracted to the charisma that he has, because he's sometimes funny, he's creative, he's quick on his feet when he's talking. So yeah, those are good things. But these other things are out here too, and some of them are just really disturbing. And look at these images here. And I know the defense notion will be, it's just art. Okay. This is still coming into somebody's mind to make this for their personal use, or how they want other people to see them. Whatever. It's pretty nasty. You got to agree. This is pretty nasty.
I'll tell you what else is nasty. Horror films. I often wonder what kind of headspace the directors of horror films have to be in to write the horror films that they do. And I personally don't enjoy horror films at all. Having said that, I don't enjoy Marilyn Manson's music either, or his videos. But I can see the artistic interpretations.
So I don't think it's credible to say that the mind that finds these images worth creating is a mind that's completely incapable of abuse. And I'll add two more factors into that. And one is, at different times in Manson's life, of course, and this is true with the women that he was partners with, is engaged in heavy drug use by his own account and by their accounts, heavy alcohol use, and behind closed doors, extremely exhausted on unknown combinations of drugs. How can anybody say they know what did, or other than the participants, and maybe they don't know, what did or didn't happen behind those closed doors? How can you know that? If he's sweet later when he's sober, how do you know what happened behind that door? You don't know.
Very true. However, we have established through the Depp versus Heard case that drug and alcohol abuse does not necessarily equate to physical or sexual abuse.
So the drugs and alcohol are a factor in terms of the behavior. Like, how far amplified did this notion of treating women like this get at any point over decades? It never went too far, and you just know that, even with all the drugs and stuff. The other thing, I think I've seen people approaching Manson backstage and at events and things like that. And sometimes, and this includes women too, that when they're talking to him, you can tell they want him to be this kind of person. They want the nasty person. And in most of these, to Manson's credit, I don't see that he lives up to that. I know about the stories about him touching women and having them strip and things like that on tour buses and stuff. It's nasty rock and roll stuff. I get all that. But that's a two-way street. I'm sorry, it just is. The fans push him into this character. They eat it up. And I think you get a fueling there of this character becomes a larger presence in his life potentially because of that, because that's what people want. And that side of his personality develops more than maybe it otherwise would have.
When you look at the cult following that Manson has in the BDSM genre, you can kind of see what Southern Law is getting at here.
So when you contend that Manson is incapable of having abused these women, that it's not in the realm of possibility, it doesn't make a difference if 5,000 of them say it. They're all liars for the reasons that everybody thinks that they are. They all lie. When you do that, you're also saying Manson was a liar, that all the things he ever said about abusing women, that every one of them were lies. And I know you pick them all up and you put them into the basket of, it's just his art, bro. Even though he says that's not completely distinct, you'll say, well, that's also art, bro.
I would argue, is it necessarily a lie when you're creating a character? I mean, we know Captain Jack Sparrow was a character mostly created by Johnny Depp, and some parts were based on truth, like, his drinking problem. Just as Marilyn Manson was a character based in part on Marilyn Monroe and in part on Charles Manson, may well reflect some truths about himself, but they also reflect truths about all of us, that we all have a soft side and a hard side to our personalities, which I think is the entire point of the character that he has built.
So if you got a motive like that, a narrative that you can use to forgive the lies of the person that you're supporting, I get that. But you need to understand, not everybody's necessarily going to go, I'll give this person the benefit of the doubt for everything they've ever said that would undermine their case, and I'll strictly construe the other side, everything they've ever said, against their case. Probably not going to work like that with the judge, and maybe not with the jury. And certainly the lawyers for both sides are going to have to look at the weaknesses of their own cases. But that's not the end for Manson, the idea that he's not infallible and incapable of abuse, which I think is a strange position to have, but it does seem to be a position some people hold. That doesn't mean he's an abuser. You can still hold a position he probably didn't do it, or the more reasonable position that they can't prove it. And if they're going to accuse him of the abuse, they should prove it. And there are issues with the people making the accusations. We'll get to that on the other side. This is not some clean set of accusations. Whether you find them persuasive or not, they have their own problems. And you could say, I don't know. There are a lot of things that could be said there, but the proposition that he couldn't have done it, and I know this even though I was not with him at all times, because I know that he's sweet and is giving money to charity, and the women lie and things like that. You're beyond what you can know. You just really are. Anybody, anywhere could be an abuser. How do you know that they are or they aren't? How do you know that? Now, I do agree that the people making the accusations should have the burden of proof to show that that occurred. That's the system we have, and that's the best system that we possibly can have. That will result in some people getting off with crimes. I get that. But the consequence of allowing false accusations to put people in peril is too great, and it's just not through the course of history found to be the system that results in the closest justice that we can possibly get. So I'm sticking with that.
I'm right there with you, buddy.
So I think Manson is entitled to that deference, that I'm not thinking of him as an abuser until there's proof of that, regardless of what my own suspicions may be, which I'll tell that at the end of this video for whatever it may be worth. So that's the Manson side of the equation. Let's look at Evan Rachel Wood. Some people think she's just lying about all this. Some people don't know. Some people think, she's probably telling the truth, but if you just get far enough off the fence, go way out there into the hinterlands, you'll find people who are absolutely sure that they know that what she has said, all of it, everything bad about Manson is completely true. Probably more she hasn't remembered yet. It's all true. Now, here's the problem with that. If you're certain that all that she's saying now about Manson is true, then you are calling her a liar over a period of years about things relevant to this case.
And here's the thing. She hasn't been putting forward a character through all of those years. The good girl, innocent character only came out with Westworld. Prior to that, she has played many characters, from bad girl to mean girl to everything in between. So everything we just discussed regarding Manson is actually applicable now because she's not in character.
It's well documented in the media, in interviews, press, that before Wood decided to come forward with allegations of abuse, her stories about her relationship with Manson were far different than what she says happened now. That she called him humorous and nice and enjoyed her time with him. It was uplifting. It was life expanding. All kinds of things that she would tell over the course of the period of time she was with him, and even after that were generally positive about Manson and nothing bad.
I'm not entirely sure of the context that this statement was made in. She says, Manson owns the house he lives in. My brother has never stayed there, and the person that said such horrible things about Manson being controlling and emotionally abusive is certainly no source close to me. And that's very interesting because I hadn't seen that statement before, but we might look into that at a future date.
So there goes a period of time where that becomes quiet, and then she emerges on the other side of it and says, I've got a story to tell. I was abused. And this collates and boils down to a Manson was an abuser, that he groomed me and then abused me during the course of our relationship and threatened me after that. There's big problems with that. Whether it happened or not, there's big problems with her story, and it's just the way life works. First, she made contradictory statements for years. She wasn't a 5-year-old child when she said this. I mean, I know she was young when she got into this relationship with Manson, but at some point, your words have to mean something, and your credibility is on the line when you're an adult. When you tell contradicting stories, you're going to have to explain that, and she did do that, right? She absolutely did do that. So why did she lie about those things? We don't know the answer to that if she's telling the truth now. Of course, the Manson side, who's absolutely sure that Manson is incapable of this, they have the basket of it's just his art, bro, to put all of his lies in and carry those off the field. Wood's supporters have a basket as well called it's sexual assault, and you aren't ready to deal with it. You aren't ready to heal. You aren't ready to realize the extent of the abuse, or maybe even that it happened, until years after you're out of it. So you weren't really even lying, because your subjective perception at that time was that things weren't that bad. And then after the healing begins, you understand how bad it was, and so those things don't represent a lie. And you put all the contradictory statements into this basket and you carry them off of the field.
This is all very true, and I'm speaking from personal experience because I went ahead and married a man who was abusive. In the early days, just after we got engaged, he held a pistol in my direction, pulled the trigger, and it was loaded. So, I left him. I didn't realize it was abuse at the time, and I ended up finding out I was pregnant. So I ended up back with him, and then I married him. And then a very short time later, he was drunk and carrying on, and we were actually in bed, and he put his feet in the small of my back and booted me straight out of bed. My knees hit the wall. That's how fast I flew out of bed. And even then, I didn't realize that that was abuse. So when we got engaged, I was almost 18. When we got married, I was 19, going on 20. And it turned out that when he booted me out of bed, I was actually pregnant. We didn't find out until a couple of weeks later, but I was pregnant at the time with our second baby. So sometimes it does take a long time for these things to occur to you that they are abusive.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. I look in practical terms when I see people file lawsuits, and all of the suits in this case involve people that the actions happened a long time ago. And so you have a statute of limitations issue. I made a video about it. Everybody's talked about statute of limitations. And the way you try to get around it is this discovery rule. You didn't realize you were abused until within a reasonable time frame from when you filed your lawsuit, so that the statute of limitations is told. It doesn't bar you from filing your suit. Now, Wood didn't do that, but some of the other accusers did. And to me, that's a practical reason to say I didn't remember until now, is because that allows you to file your lawsuit. So I call that into question, that all these people had this similar experience of not realizing they were abused until basically all at the same time, and then filed this lawsuit. I'm not putting that down as support for Manson's theory that it was all concocted, but I do put it down as extremely convenient for the purpose of filing this lawsuit. I do not swallow that one right now.
I'll just add there that I haven't forgotten the abuse. Just because I've only named one or two doesn't mean I've forgotten it. As harrowing as it probably sounds to have those things done to you, I wasn't traumatized by it because I didn't realize it was abuse.
So Wood has also apparently been involved in her custody case with misleading her child's father, as well as the court, it appears, on this FBI letter and maybe some other allegations that were made in her custody dispute. So she has a credibility problem, and I don't think it's reasonable to sweep it all away and say, well, you don't have to look at this because here's the reason for it.
Again, I can speak from experience, having been involved in a terrible custody dispute, that sometimes some parties will go to such extremes to win their case that it might make even the most staunchest among us eyes water.
Both sides are going to have to explore the weaknesses of the case and more than that, because there is a middle position in this, unfortunately, which is that these people were in a volatile Hollywood rock music environment voluntarily. Every one of them entered the positions they were in voluntarily. Now, I know they say Manson exercised control once he had them in his orbit, and maybe that's true, but they got there because that's where they wanted to be originally. They're all on drugs. They're all high as a kite often. They're extremely tired. It's an unhealthy lifestyle. Manson's a pretty crazy living person anyway, and you're in that. There is a notion I know that a lot of people have that, hey, look, what is happening here to some degree is weaponizing regret. And maybe so, because Wood has said things like that she was essentially raped on the set of the Heart-Shaped Glasses video, because she had said she enjoyed being on it, had said that nothing wrong happened on it, and then that story changed, and she went from saying nothing happened to actually we did have sex, and it was a commercial sex act, she now says, and that she was essentially raped. And those words bother me from a truth standpoint. Essentially raped. You raped, you're not raped. Essentially raped kind of maybe means maybe at the time you weren't objecting, and now you are. And how does the law deal with a situation like that? Because then you have to put up this scenario that, well, I couldn't meaningfully object because I was under the control of this other individual. And I know that's a whole notion, but it's a troublesome notion because it gives, once you invoke it, you have a free pass for every behavior you ever did and the ability to assign blame to the other party. Is that really where we should be with adults? I don't know about that. So she also said that when Trump was elected, that she would have to look at the rapist in the form of her president all the time. So the essentially raped and the thing about calling Trump her rapist shows to me a very generous reading of the word rapist. And then that gets applied to Manson, and I really wonder whether at the time some of these things were going on, she was okay with it going on, and then later on when she believes that she was improperly under the influence and control of Manson, now she kind of retroactively says there was no consent or no consent possible, therefore these actions were abusive toward me. That in retrospect, even if I wasn't speaking out against it, even to him, I should have been and would have been if I hadn't been groomed. And I also don't like that word, pedophilic grooming. She wasn't a 13-year-old kid when Manson started to see her. Now, was it inappropriate? It depends on who you ask. The age gap, it was a lot. And she was young, and I guess too young to drink and all that. But still, I think she was 18 years old. So, I mean, I know what I was doing when I was 18. Hell, I was in the Army. So how much deference do you need to be given that you're essentially an infant or a child at that age? I don't think a lot, personally. I'm sorry, I don't buy the grooming scenario. That's separate than control. If he was able to exercise it, I get what she's saying. My point is, you cannot, if you support her and you want to convince other people, ignore the fact that she has, according to your account, lied about her past history with Manson. Now, I know you excuse it, but you're going to have to deal with it, and Manson's side's going to have to deal with it. So this case is kind of interesting to me in that both sides have liars on each side. And it's going to come out that they both have lied, I think. in material ways, and who's going to be able to figure out a cohesive story to patch back together their credibility to take control of the case. Right now, the narrative kind of runs on a procedural standpoint to who's filing what declarations and who's got the upper hand in motions and things. But in theory, eventually, this all gets to court where a jury will hear it. And I've heard people say, well, finally know the truth. That's asking a lot. I mean, I made another video about that, about how truth seeking is just one goal of the justice system. It is not the only goal, and it is sometimes not the top goal.
Yeah, sorry, I have to disagree with that. Here in Australia and there in the USA, we have adversarial systems. We do not have truth-seeking systems. The French have a truth-seeking system, which is still a little bit more adversarial than straight-out truth-seeking, but that's the comparison that you would make.
So it's nice to think that that's what the result's going to be, and it might be, but it also might not be, even if they go to a jury verdict. You may never know what actually happened. And a jury is not required to decide what actually happened, only what was more likely than not to have occurred. So that's a pretty low bar, and the evidence rules support that level of finding. It's not that rigorous. So we'll see what the court system has to say about it. It's a tough issue. There's no doubt. People say, well, I wish it was the good old days and stuff, but really, women were abused with almost no consequence for a lengthy period of time in many sectors of society. Now, the pendulum swings back too far in some cases on this Me Too movement to false allegations are hurting people who weren't abusive, and that's also wrong. That is also wrong, and that has to be stopped. And the only way you can do it is to let the system work the way the system was always meant to work, which is due process. The fact that it needed to be repaired to bring more emphasis to victims and to the systems of society that allowed abuse, that's separate than changing the concept of due process. Because women and men all deserve justice, and nobody deserves to be abused. I don't think anybody watching this says sexual abuse should be allowed. I mean, we really shouldn't get into that. Nobody thinks that. And almost everybody would agree that people should be protected against false allegations of abuse. And that's what the system is supposed to do. I said almost because there are some people who don't believe such a thing essentially as false allegations. And the way you end up doing that is by having your day in court if that's what you choose. And we've let some more people off the bus on that one because there are some people who think, since they already know which side is right, that any court action on this, criminal or civil, is just wrong and abuse of the system. And I think because none of us do know the answers to that with the level of certainty we wish we did, that's why you do have to allow this system to work. And you can't just call the operation of the system abuse, even though one side or the other is being wrongly put through it in this case. So that's my notion, is that I think there's two sides out there that have staked out pretty extreme positions. They haven't done it as nastily toward each other, in my opinion, as people have on the Depp Heard case, but still, they're kind of extreme positions from what I see beyond what the evidence can support, that we all maybe would be better served to be a little bit more humble with what we do know. If nothing else, that can make your argument stronger if you acknowledge, well, yeah, he did this and that's nasty. He shouldn't have done that. But this, that, and the other. And she did lie about this, okay? She's not completely credible. And that's part of what makes it harder for her to bring her case, but she still did it. Make your arguments, including the weaknesses in it, to other people so they can see that you've evaluated the whole context of what's going on.
Essentially, I feel the same way that Southern law does. Looking at both sides of the arguments and investigating the veracity of the evidence doesn't necessarily put you on one side or the other. Looking at Phoebe Bridgers, for example, because she's a public figure, her allegations were very easily dismantled by the things she has been associated with or said and done in the past. That doesn't mean she outright lied. She may well have overheard something related to the character that Manson was discussing for Sons of Anarchy. It just means that her input holds little weight or value as far as evidence is concerned. And then there's her previous involvement with knocking other musicians off their pedestals with little to no evidence again. which doesn't go to the truthfulness or falsity of the current matter. It just demonstrates that this kind of thing is a type of abuse in itself. The point being, two wrongs don't make a right, right?
Misogyny, so much misogyny everywhere. Misogyny is all I can see because it is all I am looking for. Did you hear about the verdict that Johnny Depp won against Amber Heard? How can a jury be so misogynistic? Not to mention the judge. Sure, she's a woman, but she's just a pick-me. Like all the women defending Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson. They all disgust me. They're all just out there desperate for men's approval. Like Colonel Kurtz, the queen of internalized misogyny. How can anyone not believe a woman? Amber Heard is a woman, so by definition, she should be believed. But how dare anyone believe all the women who testified for Johnny Depp? They don't count because they don't claim to be victims. Amber must be believed because she says she's a victim, and that's how victimhood works. It's an identity. If you say you're a victim, no one has any right to question you about it, including lawyers. Did you see Camille Vasquez asking Amber all those nasty questions? I couldn't believe my ears. How can a woman be so misogynistic? And why did this trial even happen in the first place? Believe all women should be the law. Women always tell the truth. So it makes no sense to sue a woman for lying and defamation. Women are not capable of lying. But thankfully, there is still some sanity left in the world. Good people like myself, who are on the right side of history, can still turn to The Guardian, Salon.com and Rolling Stone magazine for some rational thinking. Look, now this is what I call common sense. The Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial was an orgy of misogyny. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Over the past 6 weeks, as the trial was live-streamed online, many of those who have tuned in to watch have treated Heard with the same contempt that Depp did in his texts. A broad consensus has emerged online that Heard must be lying about her abuse. She has been accused of faking the photos of her injuries from Depp's alleged beatings, painting bruises on with makeup. She's been accused of convincing the multiple witnesses who say Depp abused her to lie, repeatedly and under oath, for years. These conspiracy theories are unsupported by the facts of the case, but that has not stopped them from spreading. Online, the case has taken on a heady mythology, and belief in Depp's righteousness persists independent of the evidence. She's right. Johnny Depp's side presented no evidence whatsoever showing that Amber Heard ever said or did anything remotely abusive. There are no voice recordings of her clearly admitting that she was the one starting physical fights and hitting her ex-husband. I mean, there are a few, but those don't count because we know she's the victim, because she says so. And how many times do I have to say we have to believe her because she's a woman? And yes, this great journalist is absolutely right to point out that all Johnny Depp supporters are motivated solely by their hatred of women. They don't care about facts. If they did, then they would know that the only fact worth caring about is that women must always be believed. Because we are not intellectually complex enough to ever be able to not tell the truth. Our stories and motives should never be questioned, because we are innately virtuous and innocent. We're like children. Actually, children do lie sometimes, so we are even more innocent and childlike than children. Isn't feminism wonderful? Feminism is all about equality, as you can see. As feminists, we demand more equality for women, as in, women deserve to be more equal than men. Anyone suggesting Amber Heard should show some evidence of having been abused, such as any actual photos of her injuries, completely misses the point. She's shown us lots of pictures of Johnny Depp sleeping. How dare anyone ask her for anything more? Is it really that difficult to just believe her? And look at this other gem from Rolling Stone, my favorite music magazine that writes about everything but music these days. It also has a great track record when it comes to false allegations, so no one should question their judgment on this topic. Men always win. Survivors sickened by the Amber Heard verdict. In particular, the trial has underscored the idea that survivors of abuse must adhere to a rigid set of standards in order to be believed when coming forward with their stories. This saga has been horrible to watch unfold, because we're once again litigating how perfect a victim you need to be in order to be a victim. People look at women fighting back against abuse and use it as evidence to play into the abuser's narrative that both parties are equally wrong, the survivor says. That's right. Men always win. Just look at how easy it was for Johnny Depp to make the public side with him. It only took him 6 years. And as the article says, no woman should ever be required to adhere to any set of standards in order to be believed when coming forward with her story. Which part of believe all women do you not understand? Women should never be expected to show any evidence ever when making an allegation. Asking for evidence is misogyny. Asking any questions about a woman's claims is, you guessed it, misogyny. And we know Amber was merely fighting back because she's on tape repeatedly making fun of Johnny Depp for running away and hiding from her. I mean, she's a woman. She has the right to start as many physical fights as she wants, and she should be free to just beat up a man if she wants to. It's misogyny to suggest the law should apply to men and women equally, because women should really be above the law. We are all perfect, angelic creatures with infinitely pure hearts, and therefore we're incapable of even thinking an evil thought. As I said in my video, where I shared my very own Me Too story, we are not complete human beings with certain strengths and weaknesses. We are not able to lie about anything or to manipulate anyone. We should be treated like children, except we should have lots of rights, of course, but no responsibilities whatsoever, and no accountability for our words and actions. We are morally superior and must always be treated as such. And who cares if a man's life and career is destroyed anyway? Who cares about men? Only misogynists do. Men are not even able to be abused. All men are potential perpetrators, and that is all they can ever be. Also, I love this headline. Amber Heard defamation verdict could complicate Me Too movement. It's true. Nuance is complicated. That's why we should avoid trying to have any nuanced conversations about male and female behavior, because that just makes life too complicated. So remember, believe all women, no nuance allowed. Or we might risk ruining the Me Too movement, which has been such a great success so far. Just look at how amazingly it has worked out for Evan Rachel Wood and her friends. Oh no, sorry, the other accusers are not her friends. Just random women who happen to all accuse Marilyn Manson at the same time by mere accident. So the bottom line is, be a good person, don't fail Amber Heard, because that will make Vice and all the mainstream media very upset. Believe Amber Heard because she's a woman, and a woman can only ever be a victim. And those of you horrible people supporting Johnny Depp, you are not just misogynists, but you are also white supremacists, as this article wisely points out. I'll leave you with these stunning and brave words. The Depp-Heard trial is perfect fascist agitprop, which is why right-wing media cannot get enough. As anyone who has glanced at social media can attest, the trial has become an occasion for a staggering number of men to wallow in their false sense of victimization. Heard has become the scapegoat for all this male anger about women's independence and women's freedom. That it's laughably false to view Depp as the victim here clearly doesn't matter. Heard is an imperfect person, so misogynists can derail any discussion about the case with demands that Depp's detractors defend every single life choice that Heard has ever made. But mostly, Depp's victim status, and therefore the victim status of men generally, can be established through the sheer power of relentless repetition, drowning out all available facts. And once those young men have bought onto one self-pitying right-wing conspiracy theory, they have been softened up to accept all the rest of them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are as upset as I am about all those misogynists defending accused men like Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson, just comment #MeToo below. And please click the like button or the dislike button and subscribe to my channel. Most of my videos are too controversial to monetize, so I really appreciate all the support I receive. During the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, I spent quite a lot of time on Twitter, unfortunately, and a lot of people got upset every time I compared Evan Rachel Wood to Amber Heard. That's because if you buy into the narratives you are fed by the mainstream media, Marilyn Manson must be guilty simply because he's being Me Too'd by many women at once. Also, Evan Rachel Wood is considered a serious actress by many, which, according to them, means that she has nothing to gain by making false allegations. But that's not true. There is always something to be gained by being perceived as an activist for a righteous cause. I do understand why a lot of people are inclined to believe Evan Rachel Wood is more credible than Amber Heard. The truth is, how we perceive people's behavior is often decided at an unconscious level, but your unconscious perceptions are often deceptive. In her documentary Phoenix Rising, Evan Rachel Wood constantly compares herself to Alice in Wonderland. Archetypally, that's a very similar tale to the myth of the abduction of Persephone. Both stories are about an innocent young girl who is forced into an unknown underground realm and who is confronted with the dark side of the human psyche. One interpretation is that, psychologically, both Alice and Persephone contain the underworld within themselves. In other words, what they really had to face was the content of their own unconscious, their shadow, essentially. However, the narrative running through the Phoenix Rising documentary with this Alice in Wonderland allegory is that Evan Rachel Wood was merely a helpless victim who had no control over any of the events of her life. Not just while she was in a relationship with Marilyn Manson, but even prior to that, starting with her childhood. Children are, of course, at the mercy of their surroundings. But for some people, like Evan, those feelings of juvenile vulnerability and fragility never go away. These people continue perceiving themselves as the victims of everyone they encounter as they go through life, never taking any responsibility for any of the turns their lives may take. As I said in my video about the most ridiculous claims in Phoenix Rising, the first half of the documentary is all about how Evan has always been everyone's victim. Her parents, who often fought at home, her agents, who recommended her for roles of troubled teens, filmmakers, who expected her to act out scenarios she was uncomfortable with, and Marilyn Manson, who she claims pressured her into a relationship. This thread runs through the whole film. It is especially obvious whenever she talks about her drug use, which, like everything else she has ever done, was not her own choice, but it was forced on her by other people, according to her. There's an interesting psychology research paper that was published a couple of years ago, introducing a personality construct called tendency for interpersonal victimhood. The researchers found that people with this tendency have an enduring feeling that they are victims across different kinds of interpersonal relationships. These people have never suffered an actual crime, but their victimhood is simply a defining aspect of their self-image. It is the lens through which they view all their experiences and interactions with other people. The paper also points out a correlation between this psychological tendency and narcissism, which is not going to surprise anyone who has scrutinized Evan Rachel Wood's claims in any detail. Female narcissism is much less talked about than male narcissism, partly because anyone daring to touch the topic will be met with accusations of misogyny. But it definitely exists, and I've already made a video about it, if you'd like to learn more. And thanks to Amber Heard, these conversations are now becoming a little more mainstream. So, back to the original question. Why do people consider Evan Rachel Wood to be more credible than Amber Heard? I think the main reason is that Evan expresses the victim archetype so naturally and effortlessly. It is clearly an important part of who she thinks she is as a person. I don't think this is an act for her. I think she genuinely believes she is first and foremost a victim in life. And this genuine belief makes her more convincing than Amber Heard. As most people can now tell, Amber is simply putting on an act, but she's not a good enough actress to be persuasive. Some say Evan Rachel Wood is a much better actress than Amber Heard, which is probably true. Phoenix Rising is her only film I've seen, and I thought her acting was fine. It's not worthy of an Oscar, but it's good enough to convince people who are already inclined to believe women in any situation. Evan Rachel Wood's tendency for interpersonal victimhood means that she really believes the story she's telling herself and the world. This makes it more difficult to prove she's lying. Certainly more difficult than in Amber Heard's case. Having followed the Johnny Depp-Amber Heard trial very closely, I believe Amber made up those allegations against Johnny simply because she wanted to get the best possible deal out of the divorce. The whole thing then spiraled completely out of control, and she has every reason to regret having started it, but now she has no other choice but to stick with her crazy lies. But the point is, I have no doubt she is aware she is lying. Evan Rachel Wood, on the other hand, probably believes she is telling the truth, at least some of the time, which she refers to as her truth. I actually like that because it implies that there could be another truth out there. An objective one, perhaps. Another advantage Evan has over Amber is that she has a kind of childlike air about her, which Amber does not. Amber is a very beautiful, glamorous and sexy woman. In her prime, while she was with Johnny, I believe she was up there with the most sexually attractive women in the world. And she has a kind of sexual charisma which will inherently make many women suspicious and jealous of her. It will also make a lot of men suspicious. Men may feel frustrated when looking at her because she represents a type of woman who is way out of reach for most men. Although most men must feel relieved now that they weren't in Johnny's place. But the point I'm trying to make is that Amber is the kind of woman who ignites intense emotions in people, both positive and negative, because she has a potent sexual energy. Evan Rachel Wood doesn't have that. She comes across as much more down-to-earth, approachable, and therefore relatable. She is very pretty, she has a beautiful face, but she is not sexy like Amber Heard. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, but this is my impression and perspective. Evan is like Alice. Amber is like Aphrodite, albeit a fake, cheap version of Aphrodite. I don't mean to disrespect my favorite goddess by this comparison, but I hope at least some of you will understand what I mean. There is also more of a contrast when looking at images of Evan Rachel Wood and Marilyn Manson than what we see with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Of course, Johnny's drug use was brought up at every opportunity during the trial. But with Marilyn Manson, it's almost like he is drugs. He is, by definition, all that is dark, dangerous, and evil. He is the closest a human being can get to being like Hades, the god of the underworld who abducted innocent Persephone. Manson was Evan's shadow, in a way, and that's exactly the reason she was drawn to him, as she herself has explained. She felt like he allowed her to be whoever she wanted to be, without judgment. Her family and Hollywood expected her to be like a perfect little princess, blonde, cute, and demure. Manson then gave her the opportunity to explore a darker side of herself, which she obviously had. And it was very dark indeed, exactly because cute little princesses have the most repressed and therefore darkest shadows. As we know from the many interviews Colonel Kurtz has done with people who were close to Evan and Manson, She took great delight in the sudden liberation she experienced in her early adulthood. She wanted to experiment and be rebellious. And not surprisingly, she ended up regretting some of the things she had done during that time. She probably regrets even being associated with Marilyn Manson now that she has calmed down and become a mother. And because of her natural tendency to perceive herself as a victim, this narrative of being groomed and manipulated by Manson probably comes very naturally to her. Her ex-girlfriend and co-conspirator Ilma Gore, who has been exposed as a grifter, also seems to have had an important role in shaping this elaborate victimhood narrative. Yet another advantage Evan has is that she has had more time to study the Me Too playbook. Amber got the timing right early on in that she managed to ride the waves at the height of the Me Too movement, when mainstream culture was thirsty for stories like hers. Evan joined the trend a bit later on, which means she's had the chance to get a feel for the types of narratives that work well, for the buzzwords people need to hear, like grooming and so on. But the ultimate elephant in the room, and the main reason people seem to believe Evan, is that she is not the only accuser to have come forward against Manson. There are several other women with seemingly similar stories who have also received some media attention. For many people, this naturally means corroboration, which creates the illusion that the women are telling the truth. But the reason these women's stories are so similar is that they wrote them together. The genius Ashley Morgan Smithline has admitted this, and Marilyn Manson's lawsuit also contains evidence for this. There were checklists and scripts, which the accusers were encouraged to use as examples. Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore systematically recruited women Manson had encounters with the help of a disgruntled former personal assistant, Ashley Waters. Those of you who have been following me for a while have heard this lots of times, but I was actually one of the women contacted by Ilma Gore and invited to these exclusive victim training meetings. And I know Ashley Waters had a role in this, because I met her when I met Manson, and she's the only one who could have passed my name onto Evan and Ilma. Ashley was also crazy enough to refer to me in her own lawsuit against Manson, attempting to portray me as a victim. She and the other women also claimed they had repressed memories, which is unlikely enough for one person, let alone a group of friends. Ashley's lawsuit has now been dismissed by a judge. Another crucial piece of evidence in Manson's lawsuit against Evan and Ilma is a forged FBI document, which the women reportedly used to persuade the others to make up allegations. They made it appear like there was an ongoing FBI investigation, misleading the accusers recruited into believing Manson was an especially easy target. Evan also apparently used this fake FBI letter in her custody battle with her child's father, Jamie Bell, to make it seem like she was in danger. Jamie Bell said Evan's story defies credibility. Law enforcement have also been quoted as saying there were some credibility issues with the victim, so charges were unlikely. If you are still inclined to believe Evan Rachel Wood, just ask yourself, if her story has any objective truth to it, then why did she feel the need to recruit other women to support her and create fake documents? She has claimed she didn't know the FBI letter was fake, which means she might end up turning against Ilma Gore and claiming to be her victim on this occasion. As you can see, the allegations against Marilyn Manson are a lot more complex than Amber Heard's hoax against Johnny Depp. There is a lot to scrutinize and dissect. What there isn't much of, though, is actual evidence. Despite showing us all those hard drives allegedly containing heaps of evidence in the Phoenix Rising documentary, we still haven't seen any of it. What we have seen, though, are fake pictures from Pinterest and lots of references to Marilyn Manson's fictional autobiography, which was ghostwritten and intentionally over the top and outrageous. As I've said many times before, Manson really is the easiest target in the world for false allegations of any kind, because his public image is literally that of the Antichrist. This is not the first time he's been used as a scapegoat, and probably not the last. You may not understand him, or you may passionately despise him because of all he represents, But please try to at least acknowledge that even he has the right to be considered innocent until proven guilty in an actual court of law, as opposed to social media. Let's not try to limit artistic expression and discourage creative people from pushing boundaries, because we may end up losing out on a lot of value these artists could contribute to our culture. Let's also move beyond judging people by their appearance. And please try to understand that an artist's public persona, in most cases, is a facade. It's not real.